Hi, Chris Postwaite here with Patriot Guardens, West Virginia National Guard, and in today's video we're going to talk about how to properly plant seeds for germination. Now, germination is a funny thing. Over the years I've seen a variety of people use a host of containers, cups, and different materials for plant tags, Venetian blinds. So you all heard the old saying that there's more than one way to skin a cat, and I always say that germination kind of falls in that exact same category. But in today's video, I'm going to use more traditional planting methods that we would use in the horticulture industry. Since I've spent years now working in the horticulture industry, I've come accustomed to using things that are made for plant germination. But if you are at home and you have styrofoam cups or fast food containers laying around, those two make excellent containers to germinate seeds in. Here's a fast food container. Pretty standard, you see from Chinese restaurants a lot of the times. These are great to sow a different variety of plants in. I don't necessarily like these for growing tomatoes or peppers in, but for seeding lettuces and things like that you can just pop up and transplant later with a small root. These make excellent little guys to do that with. Right here's a standard 6-pack cell. This is basically what I will be using today, mostly one of these that you can do. You also have the Jiffy peat pots. I'm sure you guys have all seen these. These are readily available at Home Depot and Lowe's. If you're in the Charleston area, Green's Feed and Seed also carries a large selection of peat pots and inserts. The standard 6-pack though is the industry standard for most plants when it comes to ornamentals and bedding flowers. Vegetables are a lot of times put into that. One thing about these larger peat pots I will say is I really enjoy these for like my cucumbers and watermelons, things that really don't like to have their roots kindly messed with a lot. So you can just go ahead and set these directly in the ground. Also too, in today's video I'll be planting some hollyhock seed in this. And hollyhocks also grow pretty large and in charge, and I don't really want to disturb them once they get rooted in this pot. So it's a lot easier for me just to make a nice hole in the ground, drop that in and forget about it. The 6-packs for me at home, I wash these out and reuse them year after year. Now you don't have to do that. They're cheap enough to where you can just throw them away. But I try to save where I can, be environmentally friendly where I can at home. And I know my plants don't have any diseases on them when I put them out. So it's nothing for me to make a little bleach solution and sterilize these, wash them real good, put them away. It takes me about 3 hours every year to clean all my plant pots and 6-packs and trays. So it's worth it for me to spend an afternoon cleaning this stuff year after year so I don't have to rebuy it. Another thing I'll tell you guys about too that I've really come to love over the years, this is a plug flat. And as you guys can see right here, there's 72 holes, I do believe, in this one. And you can fill this full of soil and you can actually drop in different lettuces, Swiss chard. I've done turnips, I've done beets this way, I've done carrots, started them this way. So, you know, this makes it a lot easier for me to plant stuff in the garden than going out and directly taking a seed pack and just pouring seed through a little furrow and then waiting for it to come back and then get the tape measure out and say, okay, I got to thin out 4 inches in between each plant. And you end up wasting hundreds of plants that you're pulling up by the root. So with these plug trays, you can actually drop 1 or 2 seeds into each plug tray, germinate, take your finger on the bottom, just push that up, plug pops right out, lay your tape measure in the garden. If you need to go every 4 or 6 inches, you can just do it with one plant. You've taken care of all that tedious work down on your back trying to thin manually in the garden. So these little plug flats come in very handy. I ordered this offline, or a pack of these offline several years ago. I have not seen very many of these plug flats available here locally in the feed stores. Not to say that they're not out now, but this is kind of a specialty thing. But I'm here to tell you, if you want to take the time to order some offline, this will change your life when it comes to sowing any type of lettuce, Swiss chard, beets, any type of green, cabbage, anything like that works out very well in this. Also guys, you're going to need to have you a nice tray to be able to put your flats or your plug tray in. As you can see, this just fits directly inside. So this right here is a standard 10-20 tray. It is 10 inches by 20 at 10-20. So that's the industry standard for nursery flats. So everything's kindly made for that. So you can get 8 6-packs in a tray. or like I said, on the plug tray ready to go, you can get 72 plants in a 10-inch by 20-inch footprint. So I like these. A lot easier for me to move my plants around after I've got them potted up. Also, I like the ones that have the solid bottom in them in the beginning. As I am not watering my plants super heavy because we're just trying to get the seeds to germinate, I don't really mind to have these solid bottom trays. Plus, you always want to put a humidity dome on top of this tray, and by not having any holes on the bottom, helps hold the humidity in and keeps everything locked in to get those first few days, those critical first few days, to get those seeds germinated in that high humidity environment. Now, as with most seeds, once you see the seeds pop up out of the soil, you would want to remove the humidity tray, and that's all you would need. So you're going to end up using this humidity tray possibly a week to 14 days, depending on what type of seed that you planted. But once they pop up, definitely remove this, because you're going to run a high chance of your seed rotting or damping off at the soil line because it's too humid. At that point, the plant doesn't need that high humidity as much anymore once it's out of the soil on its own. I continue to use these trays until my plants are about 2 inches tall. As long as they're inside my house or in my greenhouse in my germination area, I like to use these trays. If I do overwater a little bit, sometimes I come back about a half an hour later, lift up one of the 6-packs to see if there's a bunch of water standing in the bottom. If there is, then I'll just tip the tray up and dump the water out. But once I'm ready to harden my plants off in the spring, when we start getting those nice warm spring afternoons, I like to take them out of the solid flat tray and go into a standard 10 by 20 webbed flat. And at that point, then I can water them outside now. And the water will just run right through. And then if I get a cold night, if the weatherman's calling for a dip into the 30s, then I can just pick these nursery flats up, bring them back inside where they'll be warm, and deploy them back the following morning. And I don't have to worry about watering inside my house anymore. I can always do that outside. So these come in very handy. Now, certain plants, guys, need a little bit of extra heat to germinate. Most of the seeds that we buy in the grocery store or order from mail order catalogs that we're planting, a lot of the flower seeds, they really don't need any type of bottom heat. But I will tell you, I have found very few peppers that I have ever started in my life, sweet or hot, that don't do better when you put them on a heat mat. I highly recommend buying a 10-20 heat mat. These are about $10 to $20 depending on where you get them from. It should last you years as long as you take good care of it, wipe it off and clean it at the end of the season. But I like to just set this down on the table. I like to take my standard flat that I showed you guys earlier, my solid bottom flat, and just set it right on top. Now, a lot of people would think to put the heat mat inside the tray, but that's kindly a misnomer. If you read the instructions on the tray, it will tell you that it's not really suited to be standing in water or have water hitting it. It will work just fine underneath the tray with a humidity dome on top. It'll really create a nice greenhouse, and you'll get a nice ambient air temperature in there of about 85 to 90 degrees through most of the day, and that's really what those peppers need to germinate. Remember, peppers are a warm season crop, so they really like to have that 70-degree temperature in the soil to really germinate good. Tomatoes, they'll do okay with some bottom heat. You don't need bottom heat for tomatoes, but they do germinate quicker if you do have the bottom heat. And when I say quicker, in my experience, has been about 3 days earlier than coming out of the ground. But it's not enough for me to plug this in and waste electricity for a 3-day jump, especially when I plant my stuff with about a week on either side to make sure that I've got enough time for it to get to size, or if we've got bad weather during the planting week. A couple other things that I want to talk to you guys about was different potting medias right here, and I hope that you guys can see this. This right here is a standard Pro Mix material, and if you're looking at this really closely, you see these white flecks inside here. This is the perlite, and this is a general purpose potting media, and this is what you would use to put in containers after you went to the greenhouse and you bought plants, or maybe you've grown your own as we're doing here today. Pro Mix is a suitable material. All-purpose medias are suitable material to germinate in. However, they actually make germination mixes. Most companies make these germination mixes, and as you guys can see here, it's very fine like sand. The difference between these two is there's more vermiculite and less peat that's inside the germination mix. There's more peat, no vermiculite, and all perlite in the general purpose. And the reason being is the the seed mix right here actually will hold a little bit more water. And that's kindly important because little seedlings dry out really quick, and it's a critical time. And if you're not around, if you're at work and there's a couple hours that your pots dry out before you get home, that little seedling can crash, and it doesn't have enough root system to support itself like a full-grown plant does to be able to weather that type of drought. So these mixtures right here give you a little bit extra time. They're a little bit more spongier than the general purpose potting mix. Also too, what I like about them is it's a really fine mix. And if you guys grow a lot of flower seed like I do, you'll notice that a lot of flowers that we grow, you have to sow the seed on top of the soil. And this makes a lot better material for it to actually take root. So I'm a big fan of the seed germination mixes. For years I didn't use them, I just used the general purpose to save myself money, and I still had good luck. But my plants, I think, do a lot better if I have a seed germination mix. So I really recommend you guys going and buying you some seed germination mix. And they're readily available at Lowe's, Walmart, Home Depot, your feed stores, etc. Also, too, another little guy that I came across a few years ago that changed my life is what they call a dibbler. And I'm sure you guys have all been like, well, wait a minute, I know what a dibbler is. I've seen those for years. Yes, you have, but they've been large ones that you use in your garden to plant bulbs with. This guy is the size of a pin. It's got a flat end right here, and then this nice blunt end. This is a wonder when you're trying to plant stuff. To be able to put the holes to drop the seed at a different depth, and also to the flat end to kindly tamp it back down lightly. I got a 4-pack of these offline for I think like $6. Last you forever. It says here they're British, made out of recycled material. I have yet to see these in a store anywhere, but I have seen these online a couple of places. But it just basically takes the place of your finger. But if you're doing a lot of holes, sometimes it gets really tiresome to keep using your fingers. So I really do like this little tool. Another thing too is, guys, is don't forget to get your plant tags. Last thing you want to do is seed a bunch of stuff and then try to remember which pot that you put it in. You know, these are store-bought plant tags, but like I was saying earlier, some people use Venetian blinds, old blinds as plant tags. I've seen people use wooden stakes. I've seen people use all kinds of different things. You can use a Sharpie, standard Sharpie, to write on here what you want, but a few years ago I actually went the other route and started using a label maker to make my labels. Here you can see we got a Shasta Daisy label. And the reason why I like to do this is several reasons. One, I do realize that the label makers are not the most inexpensive thing to use. Those labels get a little pricey to buy. But this tag right here is going to last me all season, not only during germination, but once I put my plants outside into my landscape, I can go ahead and deploy this plant tag beside of it. I get about 3 years out of this plant tag before the sunlight actually breaks it down, and that's being continually outside for 3 years, through fall and winter. So I'm a big fan of doing the plant tags that way. Also too, I'm a sloppy handwriter, so it's a lot easier for me to see something that's printed out, and I'm sure some of you can contest to that. And also too, with the Sharpies, these work great during germination, but as soon as this Sharpie ink hits sunlight on these tags, it fades within a matter of a couple of weeks. And then you're like, well, what did I plant where? Because now your tag's faded. So I'm not a huge fan of the Sharpie. I used to use these exclusively, and I'd have to go back out there sometime in the middle of June and retrace over all my plant tags and re-highlight it. So I've went away completely from using the Sharpie, and now I use the labeler exclusively for labeling my plants. So now that we've got the plant tags and everything out of the way, we can talk about the actual seeds that we'll be planting. So in this case, guys, I've got some dill here. I've got Shasta daisies and hollyhocks, like I said earlier. Now, this is April 1st, and I have already planted my tomatoes and peppers, and I planted them the 15th of March. But here in the central part of West Virginia, the last frost date is May 15th. So most stuff you want to start 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date. So we've got plenty of time to still plant this stuff. You still have plenty of time to plant peppers and tomato seeds. You might not get them in the ground exactly May 15th, maybe May 20th, May 25th before they're sizable enough to put out. But if you do a really good job, maybe they'll be ready to go even the next 6 weeks. But anyway, whenever you plant anything, make sure you read the back of the packs. And that's where you're going to find the information such as the planting height and the seed depth and the spacing, etc., etc. Also, it's going to have special instruction on there about whether to sow the seed on top of the soil, a 1/4 inch deep, or deeper in some cases. It doesn't really make a difference which way you're going to go and how you're going to plant. Just make sure that you understand what the seed requirement is and what the depth requirement is on your plants too. So I tell you what, we'll start with some of this dill seed really quick here, and I'm going to plant that actually into this 6-pack because I have designed my garden to actually take six dill plants right here. So the first thing we're going to use is our nifty little dibbler right here, and I'm just going to make some holes, and I will show you guys a close-up here in a minute of what I'm doing. But I think you guys will agree with me that this thing actually makes beautiful little holes in the top of your soil. Makes it a lot easier to bring your seed pack. Now this particular dill right here actually says to direct seed in the garden outside after the danger of frost, but I'm going to go ahead and get a jump on that and get my plants about 6 weeks earlier, so that way I can get them a little bit sooner out of the garden. Plus, like I was telling you guys earlier, I don't really like getting down and having to thin a bunch of stuff, so it's a lot easier for me just to put some of this seed in my hand right here and go ahead and drop about 2 or 3 seed each down here in my holes that I've made. We'll just put a couple of seed each. Now what I like to do, guys, is I like to do 2 or 3 seed each in most holes. And the reason why that is, that ensures me that I'm definitely going to get a plant that's going to come up in that 6-pack. I'm sure a lot of you think, well, I've got 30 seeds in a pack and I need 15 plants so I can get 2 years out of that. Well, that's a great way to look at it, but I have found that a lot of times 1 or 2 of these plants won't germinate. You got a couple of bad seeds in there, and that's going to happen with any pack of seeds. So by me adding 2 seeds or 3 seeds per each cell, I'm almost guaranteed that I'll get a plant that comes up in that cell. And if all 3 of them come out, what I usually do then is I'll pull them out by root, I'll transplant them into another 6-pack and give those plants away to somebody or keep my backup plants. Or sometimes I just go ahead and cut them off with a pair of tweezers and just throw the little pot of leading away because I don't need it at that point. I'm taking my dibbler now, guys, and I'm pushing the soil back over my little holes that I had just made for my dill here. And as I was saying earlier, the great thing about this little tool is it's got this flat end right here, so I can kind of go back down and just lightly tamp where I planted my seed. Not really hard, just lightly, just enough to get it to make contact. And guys, that's basically all there is to planting a seed. Now every seed that you've got is going to be basically the same way. You're going to make a small hole at XYZ depth depending on what the pack says. And like I was telling you, my technique is to use at least 2 seeds per cell or 2 pots to guarantee that you're actually going to get 100% germination. Now, after your plants have been planted and you've put a humidity dome on them and you've let them set in the sunlight somewhere and they're starting to break through the soil and you see your first set of true leaves, it is going to be time then to start your plants with a little bit of fertilizer. Now guys, there's a couple things you can do here that you got to be careful about. One, you want to make sure that you're using a starter fertilizer to water or to fertilize these little seedlings. A good starter fertilizer is always going to have a higher middle number, as you can see here on the bottle. And that higher middle number is your phosphorus, and that is actually what causes plant roots to grow good. So that's why you're going to see a 3-10-3, or definitely that middle number will be higher, because we want more phosphorus in the beginning to actually develop that root system, just like we want more phosphorus right after or during blooming to make sure that we've got good fruits. Remember, phosphorus is for root development, fruit development mainly, but it also does a lot of other things in the plant too. When you get a good starter fertilizer, what I always recommend everybody to do is to use whatever this bottle says at half rate. In this case, it says a tablespoon per gallon of water every 7 to 10 days. That's fine to water your plants every 7 to 10 days, but I would rather see you water every 7 to 10 days with half a teaspoon, not a full. Always go less with the fertilizer. If your plants look a little peaked, you can always increase that. But if you go full rate and you have certain plants that are a little bit more sensitive to these chemical salt fertilizers, you could actually get burned and burn those little seedlings and kill them very, very quickly. So go half rate at the very little and ramp yourself up. Also, I cannot say enough about Super Thrive. This stuff has been around for years now, decades. I think 70, 60 years this has been on the market. You can readily buy this stuff everywhere. Walmart's got this, Lowe's has got this, feed stores, Amazon. I use Super Thrive every time I water. Even when I'm not using fertilizer, in between my 7 to 14 days, I still use Super Thrive. I put a couple of drops every time I water, and when I fertilize, I'll usually use a whole cap full per gallon. There's instructions on the back that tells you different rates that you can apply to different crops. You can put this stuff on your lawn. It doesn't make a difference. This is really full of a lot of good macronutrients that really helps those plants sustain life and gets that root system. So Super Thrive basically complements your fertilizing schedule and helps your plants just a little bit better. So this is basically vitamins for your plant, and this is food vitamin if you kind of look at it that way. So definitely get yourself a bottle of Super Thrive. And as far as for the starter fertilizer, there's also organic versions too that you can use. You don't have to necessarily use chemical fertilizers, so that leave that up to you guys and your preference. Okay. Now, last thing I'll tell you is after you've got your plants up and you fertilized everything, make sure that you harden off your plants. The last thing you want to do is grow these nice plants inside and then just take them straight outside to your garden. All these plants need to be hardened off. So what I like to do is the first couple of days I'll set my plant flats outside for 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon, bring them back inside, and then on the third or fourth day I'll take my plants out around 10 o'clock in the morning and let them set outside all the way up through the evening and bring them in. And on the fifth and sixth day, if I've got a warm enough night, and when I mean a warm enough night, I mean above 50 degrees, I will leave my flats outside overnight. If it still is falling below 50 degrees during that time, then bring your flats back in right before you go to bed and take them back outside before you go to work in the morning, as long as it's not below freezing before you go to work. That could still happen, and in that case you're just going to either have to ask a neighbor or somebody to help you out, or you're just going to have to leave them in your house until you get home from work. I hope you guys enjoyed our video here, and I look forward to making some more videos for you guys. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email the Patriot Gardens, and we'll be happy to answer those questions.